Give me the thumbs up. Good morning and welcome to Los Gatos United Methodist Church and our online worship. I'd like to welcome you, whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey of faith. And please let us know you are here by posting in the comments. And if you have any prayer requests, please post those as well so that we can pray with you and for you throughout the week. And I'm going to introduce Joyce Rhodes as she does our prelude. Sit back and listen. If you have any, light a candle. That's okay. Good morning, and welcome to Las Gatas United Methodist Church. Whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey of faith, you are welcome in this time of worship, and we are glad that you are here. We are glad that Bill Cartmell is here with us today preaching, so thank you, Bill. Shall we join together in prayer? Holy God, there is within us a deep desire to know you, to rest in your presence, to trust in your mercy, to feel your loving embrace envelop us. But it seems that we are always on the move, always rushing from one moment to the next and missing you. Slow us down in this time of worship. Help us to be still and silent so that we can listen to your voice speaking just to us. Thank you for this sacred time and space to be together and to be with you. Amen. Now, join us, get out your lyrics and join us and join Joyce Rhodes and Sue Livingston as we sing our opening hymn, Open My Eyes That I May See.
Good morning. It's a joy to be with you all this morning. Our scripture reading will be from Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. It goes like this. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger to you, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you." The king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The second reading is 1 John chapter 4, verses 19 to 21. "We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, bears false witness. For whoever does not love their brother and sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister." May the Lord bless the reading of his word this morning. As you know, when I do sermons, I love to ask questions at the beginning, and today I would ask the question, who has ever had to move themselves? I would always raise it, we have a couple of volunteers right here in the room. Yes, most people have had to move themselves without benefit of moving company. Isn't it a joy? I'd rather go to the dentist. It is less painful and takes way less time. No slam on the dentists in the audience. So when Jennifer emailed me back on May 18th, asking me to do the sermon this morning, my first inclination was to say, oh my goodness, I'm so busy. And then the email went on and said, I will be moving out of the parsonage, and our new pastor, Kate Connolly, will be moving in. And I thought to myself, I hate to move. I'd rather do a sermon. So here I am, ready to go. I have 3 beliefs in my life that have been very persistent. I have many more beliefs, but 3 in particular that I follow. The first one is I truly believe in a higher power. I call that higher power God. I am a scientist. I teach science. The more I study science, the more I look at how the universe came about, how the solar system came about, how a fingernail gets developed in my body, I see miracle after miracle after miracle. The second belief I have is that if we could follow the teachings of Jesus, just get along, take our resources to help each other, the world would be in a spectacular place. Yet I know that's a Pollyannic think on occasion. There are people in the world that don't think like me, so I've extrapolated that thought long ago, thinking, well, if there's just some kind of existential challenge to our existence, that maybe then and only then would we come together and realize how wonderful we can do when we work together. And I have to admit that extrapolation has been challenged in the way that we're handling the coronavirus in the world today. Not only governments not coordinating, but just look at America, where we have siloed states, red and blue, and they're divided by philosophy and their assumptions about how to treat this disease. And guess what? We are suffering as a consequence to that. Last Sunday, Johnny and I got in the car, drove down here to say our fond farewells to the Murdochs while they were on their way out, and I was pleased by the number of people downtown and shocked by the lack of masks. I could not believe my eyes. Is it that we are so concerned about our creature comforts that we don't care about our fellow citizens or our relatives or our loved ones? We could actually have both if we wore a mask, separated ourselves 6 feet, and just washed our hands. I see continuous advertising telling us we're all in this together. Well, there's no doubt the general circumstance we are all in it together. But I'm not really sure we're on the same page. The virus is a living thing. It just doesn't care. It will take advantage of our divisions of thought. Now, in spite of all those issues, I am a little Pollyannic. I do see some reasons for hope. Because even though governments aren't collaborating, scientists and doctors are. And they're finding, as we speak, therapies to keep any of us who get sick living longer or avoiding being sick at all. And also vaccines, which will hopefully come soon so we can get back to pre-coronavirus living. For example, in case you haven't heard of these things, dexamethasone, remdesivir, plasma therapy. One can actually take people on oxygen or on ventilators and reduce their morbidity rate by 20 to 33%. Hallelujah. Remdesivir, if you take it early, will reduce your stay in a hospital, if that's where you end up, by 20% to 50%. And plasma therapy, even though it's only tried in very, very small cases, it actually is doing an exceptional job of keeping people alive and avoiding this dreadful disease. Now, what's interesting is, I want to bring up HIV just for a second. If you think about HIV, there is no vaccine for HIV yet. But there's a string of therapies we take, and look at Magic Johnson. He's living decades. People are living way longer with that dreadful, dreadful disease. The things I just mentioned are been used in isolation. What if we stacked those? Some doctors and analysts say we could do the same thing we've done with HIV even without a vaccine. But there's also good news on vaccines. 125 are in clinical studies right now. I don't know if you know what phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are. I'll just tell you about them quickly. Phase 1 means you're just going to see if a drug is safe. 2, if the dosage and if it's at the right dosage, is it effective fighting the disease? And 3, you're checking the efficacy and making sure it's safe. There are 11 vaccines in phase 1, 8 in phase 2, 3 in phase 3. When you hear the news that there's possibly a vaccine by the end of this year, I believe that will happen. And think about this for just a moment. We've only been at this 5 months. 5 months doesn't sound like a long time to me. I mean, Jesus went in the desert for 40 days. That seemed like a tougher thing to do than stay home and take care of yourself. So if we can just do our part and let the doctors and the scientists do their thing, we can beat this thing. 2 years ago, I decided to re-enter the workforce and just to be a substitute teacher, which quickly turned into a full-time job. And now I teach all the STEM classes. I've had to relearn a lot of things, but the one class that's the toughest for me to teach is environmental science. That is yet another existential issue we have right now, and I frankly think it's a much longer-term issue and more deadly, potentially, than even coronavirus. I know, in fact, if you notice, I'm sure everyone did, how clear the skies have been. You know, people were staying home, the skies cleared up, there were no airline contrails. It was fairly amazing. And the good news there, I actually did a little research on this. We talk about flattening the curve for coronavirus. We've actually flattened the curve for increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, which is exceptionally good news. The trouble is, as soon as we go back to work, we're going to start back up that curve again, unless we start doing something about it. Now, I don't know about you, when I was growing up, someone mentioned Siberia, and the thing, I think of Dr. Zhivago, right? These big, long vistas of snow, and that's where gulags were. And last week, in fact, last couple days ago, inside the Arctic Circle, there's a town whose climate in June is normally 68 degrees, had a temperature of 104. If there's any thought that the ice caps are melting, that should probably solve that problem for us. The next war we have may not be fought over territory or even ideas, but over water. This is the most frightening thing I've ever tried to research. Our aquifers and rivers are drying up. This is where we get most of our drinking water, and they're also polluted. Scientists say we're heading toward a 4-degree rise in temperature if we do nothing by the end of this century. Let me paint a picture for you what that will look like. South of the equator, New Zealand will be the only land that you will be able to live on, the only place you can go outside and raise crops, other than Canada, the aforementioned Siberia, and Scandinavia. You may want to start buying property there right now, unless we stop this. And here's something else I just learned this yesterday, and I apologize, I have to read it, but it's just really disturbing. The increase in global temperatures, coupled with the increase in ozone and particulate matter, which go hand in glove, are linked to a 42% increase in stillbirths. And black mothers are more susceptible to those increases due to inadequate health care. They're living closer to polluting power plants and the inability to afford air conditioning. Okay. Even as bad as that is, there are really some good news on the environmental front. First of all, scientists agree we are not going to see a 4-degree increase by the end of the century. They have come together under that Paris Accord. Out of the 195 countries in the world, 104 signed it. Now there's only 193 as we withdrew, and I trust we fix that quickly. And one of the countries in that accord, which says that they will reduce their carbon footprint within a certain period of time, was Scotland. Scotland, in 2005, had 15% of their renewable energy, or 15% of their electricity was generated by renewable energy. They set a goal by this year, 2020, that 100% of their electricity would be generated by renewable sources. If you go to Scotland today, well, or when we can travel to Scotland again, and you plug in your dryer or your toaster or whatever, you can know that that electricity was generated by wind or rivers or the tides or wave action. As long as the moon keeps circling and the wind keeps blowing, Scotland's going to have electricity. There's even good news in the United States. We are building new power plants. Renewable resourced power plants, wind and solar, are by far the #1 new power plant we are now building. We are no longer building coal or nuclear. We still have to build a little natural gas, but that too is on the decline. I can't imagine how we could positively affect the global warming if the United States were to do what Scotland did and say in 15 years we will no longer use non-renewable resources to generate electricity. 50 years ago, young people, me among them, marched across the country against the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech and was marching in the South for civil rights. Cesar Chavez, he was getting boycotts for California grapes to try to highlight what our grape pickers were going through. And I remember at that time, oh, and also, by the way, between 1965 and 70, if I have those dates correct, there were 174 race riots in the United States. To live through that time was to live a little bit in fear. And that as background, I remember as a freshman in college at Santa Clara University, sitting in a political science room with 3 of my fellow students as Black Americans. And of course, their position was, rightly, they were upset. And they said, we need to do something now. And they wanted change now. And I took the position, vocally, that yes, they were right, but maybe we should go a little slower, pick a couple things to really get done correctly, and then wrestle those to the ground. If I could meet them today, I would shake their hand and tell them that they were absolutely correct. I was wrong. They should have asked for more things, and I should have helped them. Now, since that time, 50 years ago, there have been some benefits to the civil rights for Black people. For now, Black Americans graduate from college more than they did in the 1960s. Their incomes are up significantly. But there still is a wide income and opportunity gap for people of color and whites. I'll read a couple to you. The Black poverty rate today is 21%. 21% of Black Americans live in poverty. That's 3 times the rate of whites. Black households earn $61 for every $100 earned in a white family. This one really, imagine this for a second. For every $100 in white family wealth, Black families have $5.04. Imagine if you would, right now, came home, opened up your 401k statement, and you had 5 cents on the dollar. Aside, after you picked yourself up off the floor, you'd probably be pretty doggone angry. 40% of African Americans are poor enough to qualify for welfare. That's twice the rate for Latinos, Asian Americans, and whites. In 2017, Black represented 12% of our total population, yet we're 30% of our prisons. I'm sure you've heard this statistic. The percentage of Blacks aged 25 and older with a high school diploma or more was 72%. That sounds pretty good in a way, unless you think about it as 1 in 4 Black Americans don't have a high school diploma. Same census, 85.5% of whites did. College percentage of Blacks with any college degree was 14%, compared to 27% for whites. And by the way, our Asian American friends are close to 50%. Good on them. So I see some positive police reform coming out of the demonstrations demanding that reform, rightfully so. If we get everything that those demonstrations demand, it will not stop racism. The rest of this sermon is for us to think about how we can fix that problem. First of all, how did so many black people end up in our prisons? The police did not put them there. The police maybe did the arrest or whatever. Prosecuting attorneys make a decision on which cases go to court and get prosecuted and they have a big hand in how long and severity of the punishment is. I don't hear anyone calling for prosecutorial reform. And what about our prisons? I remember growing up, I talked to my wife about this yesterday. It seems to me we always talked about recidivism rates. How do we keep people out of prisons? Right now, our recidivism rate within 5 years is 77%. And remember, the majority of those prisoners are of color. So what can we do about these things? What is it we can do? And I was struck by a black woman on television. I really wish I caught her name and could tell you what she did for a living. But she brought up the point that we should not depend on governments to solve this problem. So far, they have been failing. She said, sympathetically and very heartfelt, we need as individuals to solve this ourselves. And we need to solve it within the confines of our communities first. And if you want to see proof of that, I mean, one would think we'd be pretty joyful that we finally passed a non-lynching law in the United States this week. The only thing you look at from historically, we've been trying since 1900. 7 presidents have asked for this to take place, and it wasn't until 120 years later that we got one. That is appalling to me. Echoing this black woman's advice about doing things individually, the LA Times published an article on June 4th this year. 7 things we can do. I'm going to focus on only 3. The first step, admit there is a problem and own it. As you all know, I did Celebrate Recovery. I'm very familiar with what a 12-step process looks like. You want to solve a problem, you got to first admit you have it. You can do all the things in the world you think are right, but until you know that you have a problem, it's not going to be right. What do we mean we need to own it? I think the Times had a very, very good quote about this. We have to challenge the ways that racism pervades our assumptions, our fears, and expectations. How do we develop those assumptions, fears, and expectations? We get it from what we see and what we experience. There's very few black families in Los Gatos. We don't have a big experience with them. So our experience comes through television and news reports and movies where over the decades, blacks have not been portrayed favorably. Back to the LA Times. Otherwise, we are doomed to repeat the pain and suffering that the country is experiencing now. That could have been written in the 1960s. It would still be true today. The second step, talk about racism and how to be an anti-racist. Simply put, talk to black people about their experience. Go get a black friend or a black acquaintance. I know that's probably difficult. I just mentioned there's not many, but 6 degrees of separation, we can find ways to have those conversations. And if you can't, read a book about a black experience and racism. Come to understand it through the lens of their eyes. I personally have done both of those things multiple times. And I can tell you, the content of the books and conversation can be very trying. However, it can also be exceptionally inspiring. And for me, the experience is enlightening, and I hope over the long term will be cleansing. I started this by saying I had 3 beliefs. I've only talked about 2. But this is where the LA Times and I get into lockstep really quickly. Fight racism with education. I've been told and heard there's no panaceas in life. I could not disagree more. Education provides a better economic environment. People who are educated don't do crimes. They don't get incarcerated. People who are incarcerated and get on a rehabilitation program whose basis is education cut the recidivism rate in half. Those programs pay for themselves. Educated people find solutions to pandemics and environmental problems. They define philosophies that lead to the founding of democratic principles and nations. They come to understand and appreciate the differences in cultures and individuals. And they are our neighbors. Right here in Los Gatos, 66% of the adults have some college degree, more than twice the rate of the entire United States at 30%. Is it a wonder that we're not the 30? Is it a surprise that we're the 33rd most, or I would say expensive, but we have yes, we have the most money, if you will, of all the cities in the United States. We're in 33rd place. So, education. You're probably saying, education, how am I going to fix that? Glad you asked. Big brother and big sister, that's still a thing. They have programs where you go and you can be a big brother or a big sister to a black child in a community. Doesn't even have to be brought to Los Gatos. 2 hours a week, you can go to them, they will hook you up, and you can, on the educational side, you can end up going to school with that child for 2 hours, helping them, giving them a leg up. There are many, many, many schools in this area that are failing California's standards on math and English. If you can do math, if you can speak English, you can call those schools. I'm certain they'd be happy if you wanted to say you would like to tutor a child in those schools. The wealthy have the money to hire tutors. Others do not. I read with interest the town of Los Gatos came out with a statement of inclusion and diversity, which I decided to read. I thought this is a great thing. Nothing in that talks about how we're going to take care of racism, but it does go into great detail how we're going to police our police, which is a good thing. But what else could we do in this community to help black students or other students of color? So I'm a business guy. I whipped out my Excel spreadsheet, and I said, what if we just voluntarily paid $100 a year per parcel in Los Gatos? There's 9,600 parcels. That would be $960,000. And if we did $200, it would be twice that amount. Let's just round it to $1 million and $2 million. If you divide that by $2,500, which is the average price of a rental unit in Los Gatos, and multiplied it by 12, you could help 32 families, black families live in Los Gatos for free. If they were willing to pay or could afford to pay half, that would be 64 families. That's at $100 a year just for single family dwellings. If you made that 200, you could help 128 black families move into this town and take advantage of our excellent schools. What a difference that could make in the community. Could you imagine if we did that and it was successful and other wealthy communities started doing the same thing? We could fix this racism thing now. However, I just said before, we should be careful asking governments to fix our problems, asking the city to collect taxes, pay it to the schools who are run by the state of California. You could see that could get a little messy, but we could do something right now. My wife and I have done foreign exchange students. Now, we've only done them for a summer or a couple of weeks and months, but it's really pretty cool. It's really a lot of fun. You can't get a foreign exchange student in the state of California this year. It's not going to happen because of the coronavirus. So why can't we do a local exchange student? Why couldn't we find a child of color in a school that would love to come to our schools? Could we not? Do we not have space in our homes for one child? Why does a child have to come from Germany or France? Why couldn't they come from San Jose? And then there's the big ask. What if you fostered a child of color? What if you took 4 years out of your life to make sure they could get through high school, or 7 years for middle school and high school? What if we did that, or even more? I know that is a terribly big ask. I actually think about it myself, and I haven't done it. But is it a big ask compared to 400 years of slavery? 400 years of Jim Crow. 400 years of segregation. 400 years of lynching. 400 years of institutional racism. Dr. Martin Luther King said it best in his I Have a Dream speech. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. Rabbi Healy, who was born 100 years before Jesus, said this: "If not now, when? If not us, who?" Please join me in prayer. O God, who art the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, Lord of heaven and earth, open our hearts that we may hear your voice, which constantly comes from within. Disclose to us your divine light, which is hidden in our souls, that we may know and understand life better. Most merciful and compassionate God, give us your great goodness. Teach us your loving forgiveness. Raise us above the distinctions and differences which divide us. Send us the peace of your divine Spirit, and unite us all in your perfect being. Amen.
Thank you, Bill, for that wonderful message. I bring to you the prayers and concerns of our congregation. Albert Baker asked for prayers for Bud's stepbrother, Paul, in Vermont, struggling with the end stage of cancer. Mason Neep and his family sends their love and prayers from Utah. Prayers for Cindy Brain for a speedy recovery. Prayers for the homeless and our shower ministry. Continued prayers and courage and strength for Kevin, who is seriously fighting cancer, and his sessions and treatments. Like healing prayers for Debbie Crow and her friend Kevin. Prayers to Sally and family as they mourn the loss of the death of her husband and father, Burton. Healing prayers for Lori Madden, Becky Schmidt, Cindy Brain. Prayers for Jennifer and her family as they start their new ministry in Pleasanton, and continued prayers for our church and our interim pastor, Pastor Kate, as we are in our time of transition. Ann Reynolds asked for prayers for her nephew Benjamin, who's in Arizona in the ICU unit, and his family is expecting a new baby this week. Karen Elfeld asked for prayers for their niece, Dee Heckman, who continues to battle cancer. I'd like to remind you that you can continue to donate through our website, or you can mail in your donations to the church. Shall we bow our heads in prayer? God of grace and mercy, we thank you for your many gifts to us. We thank you for life, for love, for your abiding presence, for the promise that you are with us and that your Spirit is implanted within our hearts and in all of life. We lift up to your loving care all the prayers of our congregation this morning, confident that you hear us. We lift up all the joys that we have shared this morning, knowing that your presence is with us in our joys as well. May your Spirit come upon us and this community of faith today. Slow us down to listen to your voice. Fill us with courage to act and speak with boldness and grace. Energize our faith and empower us with new visions. Through the power of your Spirit, we offer this and pray the words of Christ that has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
I hope it will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I once was an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. That was a quote from John Newton, Anglican priest and author of Amazing Grace. And his reflection was upon the fact that he was a coarse young man, a sailor who dwelled in the slave trade. Hundreds of Negro and black families were taken from the coasts of Africa to the New World under his watch. When we hear that song, we should focus on its message of forgiveness and redemption. But I would ask just one small ask this morning. Every time we hear that song, we should ask ourselves, is racism dead in the world? And if it is not, let's ask ourselves one more question. What can I do to stop it? Go with God's mercy. Amen.